It's the Joey Only Show. Welcome back here, everybody. Giving my love out to everybody out in Tumbler Ridge and everybody across northern BC, Canada, and the world beyond. Of course, we're all feeling different things about what's happened there. One thing I am feeling right now is at least a little satisfied to see this one image going around. And, the slogan I kind of heard was, "There's no politics here." And I thought this is just great. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's the Prime Minister. And he's standing there with, he's got like Elizabeth May there. We got, Pierre Poilievre and some other people. And it says, politics is not welcome here. We pretend we're all on different teams under different leaders. But the reality is those are just constructs that we pretend are real. We're not on different teams. What's real is we're all one people. We're all one community. The sooner we understand that, the better off our country will be. We are humanity.
There it is.
Okay, what we're going to talk about tonight, is in relation, of course, to what's happened in Tumbler Ridge, but we're not going to talk about the details in Tumbler Ridge all that much. But I do have some questions from that event that I thought were worth looking into on a wider level, even if I don't have answers for this event right now. Larger questions about the mind of someone who goes and does this. What's going on? What's the things in common? Maybe warning signs. Maybe we could prevent something in the future like this from happening if we all kind of put ourselves in their shoes and understand what might lead someone to this outcome. So that's kind of what we're going to look at a little bit here. Okay, and I have some questions about Tumbler Ridge that we will be asking in the process. But, just to kind of go over some of the, things that we see commonly associated with people that go and do school shootings in particular, what we see is something called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Approximately 72% of shooters have a history of trauma, abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. Some traumatic events have gone on in their lives that have increased their likelihood of turning towards violence or violent behavior. Right? That's a definite check mark in this one. And, we don't know too much about Jesse's mom, and I don't want to guess too much about Jesse's mom. And for those of you who are just tuning in, we'll just explain that here in British Columbia, there's been a school shooting this week in which a young person who was suffering with mental health problems shot their mother and stepbrother and went into the school nearby and randomly, it seemed, killed a number of other people, 9 people in total dead, including the shooter themselves. So that's happened in British Columbia, and we're all very upset. So for those of you from across the world who might not know what this is about, this is what we're talking about. This is what, and a curious thing that went on, there was a choice that was made by the shooter after they had shot their mother, and that was they went to the school instead of looking for their dad. So I don't know what to infer from that, but there's something interesting there. There's something tied between this event, there's a clue here into the mind of the shooter that we can sort of talk about in general, in a more generalized sense. So bullying and isolation, and again, I don't know what the relationship was like with the mother, but we know that 60% of shooters report being victims of bullying, either in person or online, and that might include within the household. They will feel rejected socially, alienated, and probably feel like there is no future for them. They have mental health concerns, so they can't see the future. Not all shooters have diagnosed severe mental illness, but many have the warning signs: suicidal ideation, extreme anger, depression, and of course, whoever does this has access to firearms, generally from their own home or their relatives. So we got some check marks here that are certainly things we know of. Now, I don't know if there's leakage per se in this case here in British Columbia, but we call leakage when someone communicates their intent. So about 94% of the time, the perpetrators tell somebody, they share their intentions with peers. They might even say it in codified language online, or, lead you to believe hey, what's up with this person? And then you kind of convince yourself out of it. It's probably nothing. They do have social media activity often, even if this doesn't occur, 88% of the time at least, they do have social media account. And they say 76% have posted disturbing content relating to weapons and threats and, violent ideation and stuff ahead of time. Yeah, certainly there's some of that in this case as well, we know. And maybe if you haven't seen my last video, I would suggest you go back to it and, watch the video I made on this topic earlier this week, because that would give you all the context for this story. But again, we're not going to rehash the story in Tumbler that much. We're going to continue to talk about what it probably has in common with other events. So 1 in 5 shooters actively study mass shooters, which is also a check mark in this case. We know that as well. Encouraging students to report leakage to adults is a good thing. This has been known to thwart numerous plots. So, young people out there, adults, talk to your young people about this. If you hear this stuff, we need to know. This stuff needs to not be just kept amongst kids when this is going on. This has to get to the adults ahead of time, and it seems to have a good effect thwarting it. But also having some threat assessment teams, it would probably be a beneficial thing. And, we know the problem with the North is that mental health access is limited. I even spoke with people who work in the district here today, and we're saying similar things, there isn't much for people. There isn't much we can do. So we really want to have community engagement as much as possible with young people and, honest, real relationships to try to counteract some of the negative ones they've had. So let's have some looks at some studies. Here we got an article, The Mind of the Mass Shooter, from the Journal of American Academy of Psychiatry and Law. Harold Schwartz, he's saying, the modern era of mass shootings dates to 1966 when Charles Whitmore took the bell tower at the University of Texas. In all the years since, we have made very little progress in understanding, predicting, and preventing mass shootings of any type. At the center of the conundrum is the shooter, almost always a male, and the limitations of our predictive abilities. The mass shooter presents a distinct and special challenge. So many other mass shootings are motivated by hatred and bigotry. Hatred of black, gay, queer, trans communities, Asian, Hispanic communities, Jewish people. That's all been clearly connected to mass shootings in the last decade. But there's no evidence that mass shootings in schools have been motivated by hatred of school children of ethnic, racial, cultural, political groups. So in retrospective analysis of mass shootings in schools, we've been able to piece together a sense of the personal qualities and motivations driving the shooters, but we are left adrift as we ponder the qualities that enable a person to pull the trigger face to face with young children they will kill. Any consideration of the mental state of the mass shooter is complicated by the fact so many die in the incident itself. For the deceased shooter, we are left with the examination of records, which are often inadequate, social media posts, text, emails, and occasional manifestos left behind by the shooters. In this case, we don't even have a mother or a sibling directly nearby that we can really ask, what was going on with this person in the week ahead of time. Some shooters have had no contact with mental health professionals, which cannot be taken to mean the absence of mental illness. The problem is further compounded by our inclination to equate such extremely aberrant behavior with the presence of mental illness and the loosely defined distinction between mental illness and severe mental illness. Here, the public and the media are confused, but regarding the question of mental illness in mass shooters, mental health professionals have contributed to that confusion. Virtually all school shooters can be given some psychiatric diagnosis. You can't do this without deserving a diagnosis, okay? Adam Lanza, the shooter at Sandy Hook Elementary School, had a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, autism spectrum disorder, and anorexia nervosa at different times. But when we speak of mental illness in the context of school shootings, it's fair to say that the public and the media assume we're talking about severe mental illness, which in these cases stands for psychosis. Having co-written the investigative report of the Connecticut Child Advocate and served on the Governor's Sandy Hook Advisory Commission, I can say that it is not at all certain that Mr. Lanza was psychotic. He certainly did not experience a formal thought disorder, and his beliefs, although disturbing and highly overvalued, were not obviously delusional. I mean, this is just one case, right? So I don't know how this relates necessarily, but we'll continue on, try to find out more. Clearly, he was so disturbed it's difficult to hold that he was not severely mentally ill. This confusion flows from conceptual difficulties in distinguishing highly overvalued ideas from delusions, and the loose equation between severe mental illness and psychosis. We can draw a straight line from the psychiatric literature through the media's presentation of that literature to the public's confusion with the following example. In November 2022, Science Daily, reporting on data from the Columbia University Mass Murder Database, proclaimed in a headline, "Mass school shootings are not caused by mental illness," study finds. They're reporting on an article published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, which stated that severe mental illness, which is psychosis, was absent in the majority of perpetrators of school shootings. Now, you have to have a clear enough set of thoughts in order to actually carry out the act as efficiently as possible. The efficiency is part of what they're trying to do, get the biggest number, So when you're in a completely psychotic state, efficiency will be hard to achieve. The media followed by dropping severe, reporting instead that mental illness does not cause school shootings and heightening the confusion, though the careless but common substitution of causation for the association reported. It does not require a mental health professional to conclude that mass shooters are seriously disturbed, and virtually all would undoubtedly qualify for some psychiatric diagnosis. One exception to these conclusions does not help us understand the shooter is suggested by a high percentage of shooters carrying a diagnosis or suggestions of developmental difficulties consistent with autism. In a review of the Mother Jones database of all types of mass murders, Lely and colleagues found strong evidence of ASD in 8%, an order of magnitude higher than the prevalence in the U.S. population, which is 0.8%. In 21% of the sample, there will be some indication of autism spectrum disorder traits. Although the relationship of autism and targeted violence remains persistently controversial, and it should be. It's impossible to ignore the relationship, though, between high-functioning ASD traits and mass shootings. It's especially important to understand how they may be mistaken for psychopathy, but also how these two conditions may combine sometimes, fortunately rarely, but with very deadly outcomes when they do. But neither the profiles or the diagnosis can explain what leads a shooter to shoot one or more people, precisely what enables the shooter to shoot. We know that virtually all mass school shooters return to a school they've attended to wreak their havoc. For most, these schools were places of failure, and for many, isolation, bullying, rejection, ostracism. The shootings may well reflect a vindication of the shooter's sense of justice and victimization, and an assertion through overwhelming force of dominance over their victims. And certainly for the shooters who felt unseen in their school settings, they ensure their place in the minds of the community that paid them little mind. They will never be forgotten now. We must also consider the suicidality of the mass shooter. Most shooters die during the incident, either by their own hand or through suicide by cop. The mindset is best illustrated by the Virginia Tech shooter Seung Hui Cho, who posted a photo of himself online pointing a gun at the camera and another pointing the gun to his own head. The self or police-inflicted death of the mass shooter is a unique suicide in the sense that the death is elevated to a very public spectacle and occurs in the context of terrible harm inflicted back on the community. It is safe to say, I want you to see the terrible harm you have done to me. I want you to feel my pain. There's a lot in here, so we're going to skip a lot of paragraphs here just to sort of get a few more tidbits out of this study. At the time of the Sandy Hook, Mr. Lanza, Adam Lanza, was living in a locked room in his mother's home, communicating with her only by email. The windows in his bedroom were covered by black plastic bags, while his only other connection to people was in chat groups with other mass murder enthusiasts. Now let's have a look quickly at Jesse Van Rootselaar and compare. The shooter had been apprehended multiple times under BC's Mental Health Act and had dropped out of school 4 years ago. Supreme Court's decision in 2015, a dispute between the shooter's parents, described Jennifer Jacobs moving her children between Newfoundland and Labrador, Grand Cache in Alberta, and Powell River, BC in the previous 5 years. Jacobs, also known as Jennifer Strang, was found to have engaged in reprehensible conduct by failing to give her children's father enough notice she was moving back to Newfoundland in August 2015. She was ordered to return their children to BC. In the court ruling, Justice Anthony Saunders blames Jennifer Jacobs' nomadic lifestyle for Justin Jan van Rootselaar not having rigorously pursued his parents' rights. The court spells his father's surname without the space. Mr. Strang acknowledges in her affidavit that there have been at least months at a time where Mr. van Rootselaar has had no idea where the children are. Jacobs is described in the court documents as being pregnant with a child due in January 2016. Her existing children, Saunders' ruling says, had no personal contact with their father at the time of the ruling, although they were beginning to have phone contact. Her Facebook accounts listed her home as Law in Newfoundland. In that small community of 600 on the west coast of the French islands of St. Pierre-Miquelon and a 400-kilometer drive west of St. John, she's remembered only as an occasional visitor. Resident Doris Strange is unrelated but says Jacobs used to visit from BC when her grandmother was alive but never stayed long. According to 2018 posts on her social media, Jacobs had 5 children. She was featured in a 2023 article from the Northeast BC news site energeticcity.ca urging parents to push for better health care. The article was published after a nurse said Jacobs' then 7-year-old son had a stomach bug, but it turned out to be appendicitis. Her profile said she worked for Tumbler Ridge Coal Mining Company. What we're getting wrong about the Tumbler Ridge shooting, blaming mental illness or identity, let society avoid harder truths about violence. Reactions to mass shootings follow the grim script. Stunned disbelief, public mourning, and a rush of conjecture in speculation. So the writer spoke with Tracy Valancourt, who holds a Canada Research Chair in Youth Mental Health and Violence Prevention, a leading researcher on the neuroscience behind aggression. Valancourt argues for clearer thinking in our risk assessments of violence and a refusal of easy explanations that substitute stigma for understanding. There's always been a general confusion that descends on these types of mass shootings. What things frustrate you? And she says, it makes sense that we often get it wrong at the beginning. Reporters are racing to get the story out, especially when there's safety concerns. But that same push means people can get hurt. In this case, the wrong person was initially outed as being involved in the shooting. That mistake won't simply disappear. It's now part of the internet. That's deeply frustrating. At the same time, I understand the pressure journalists are under. Their reporting is only as good as what police are willing to provide, and law enforcement is frequently tight-lipped. There was a recurring mental health crisis that prompted police to step in the past. How do we understand that? What would you say is the most persistent myth about the link between mental health and violent behavior? That they go hand in hand is the first thing that they say. A lot of people assume someone with a mental illness is inherently unsafe, and that's not the case, right? And we know that. Most violent crimes, including mass shootings, are committed by people who are not mentally ill. I study aggression across the lifespan. Under the right conditions, most people have the capacity to treat others poorly. We need to start thinking about that. We tend to focus on how humans are innately pro-social, but we should also acknowledge that in certain contexts, we can become hostile and antisocial. Mental health is an easy boogeyman. It becomes such a convenient explanation that it allows us to avoid harder questions. It allows us to not look closely at ourselves, our values. If we can attribute violence to something that falls outside of how we normally behave as humans. Violence and aggression are born from a lot of different factors. There's a genetic component. The more far out on the spectrum of extreme violence you get, the higher the heritability rate. Socialization practices also factor in. There are early environmental risk factors. A lot of times kids live in families that value violence, that promote violence, and that influences the way they see the world. There are neurobiological differences. Some people are psychopaths. That's rare. 2% of the population are psychopathic, and they're high on callous and unemotional traits. Their brains look quite different from non-psychopathic individuals. You can have people who are impulsively or reactively aggressive. They also have different prefrontal cortices. They tend to be dysregulated and unable to cool their jets and assess. They're really quick to anger. They see hostility in ambiguous situations. So this all comes together and makes it difficult to then say who's going to commit a heinous act and who isn't. But there are things we can put in place that would mitigate risk, and one of the things Canada's done a good job at is access to guns. Okay, so there's been enough school shootings. We have a bit of a profile. We don't know yet, but I wouldn't be surprised that this individual put out signals, and they did, that they are unhappy and disenfranchised. Many people who commit these crimes tell people about what they're going to do. The problem is a lot of people also do that and don't go on to shoot up schools and murder kids in their community. It's a difficult thing for police services and mental health professionals to figure out. Are you going to be the next serial killer or not? The fact we're mixing mental illness with violence is also going to happen with trans identity. Entire communities end up bearing the weight of action. Adolescents are incredibly motivated socially, and belonging is a fundamental human motivator. So when the individual doesn't belong, they get hurt, they get mad, they get sad. That's why in about a third of school shootings, you see a link to bullying and victimization. There's also a revenge component. School violence also can be perpetrated by kids who are suspended or expelled or who dropped out. It's like everybody who commits a mass shooting in schools is not always a current student. They can be former students. So why pick the school? I think the selection of the school is not symbolic. It's about convenience. I think that will come out to fruition on this. It's where you can find a large gathering and cause a lot of harm. Tumbler Ridge is not a big town where you can go to a movie theater or a mall. It's developmentally normal to be high on physical aggression until you enter school. If you're in a trajectory of physical aggression past grade 1, that's a red flag. That's not the norm. And I know you're going to say, well, kids get into fights at school, but that, so do I. I've been in fights. Even the person, the interviewer says, yep, I have too. In many cases, a firm talk with someone in authority is all it takes to scare you straight. But there's a smaller group that's largely impervious to these interventions. These individuals come into contact with youth justice early, and at age 12, again at 16, then continue offending. As teenagers, they may already be committing intimate partner violence. As adults, they may go on to maltreat their children. And it's most likely that a lot of these shooters come from families where there's part of this already going on, like they're being raised by one of these people. Importantly, many of them drop out of school around grade 9 or 10. That means they disappear from school-based violence statistics and show up in community data instead. So people who may have had a couple fights, dabble in aggression, they can be susceptible to online radicalization. We know that there is some of this going on too, into anti-government fringe groups. I like how they say that. I mean, like, I've been into anti-government fringe groups my whole life on the far left here. Like, every kind of political action I've been involved in, and not once did somebody at our meetings say, like, what we should do is go shoot up a bunch of people. So, we're inherently cooperative on our side. So let's take from that what you will. What anti-government kind of groups are you talking about? You're talking about extremist groups. And even the Rockefeller Institute of Government, I don't know what this is, but it's got this crazy mass shooting page. I'm not sure how accurate it actually is, but it seems like it. 1,728 total fatalities since 1966, since the Austin Bell Tower school shooting. 4,428 victims, 510 shootings. Mass shootings are most likely to occur in workplaces and schools. Timing mirrors activity of locations. 73% of the time handguns, 33% of the time rifles. Perpetrators tend to be white more often than not. They are overwhelmingly male. Average age 34.5. See, the statistics I've seen from other more official studies seem to be much higher, even 98% of the time overwhelmingly male. So that makes me question this a little bit. But still, mass shootings continue to be a concern for policymakers. And look at the United States there, right? So we have a little bit of a problem in Canada with one event. Keep it in context. This is a big thing in the United States. It's been going on for a long time. It's bad. They've had a lot of shootings there. So access to guns is a big one. We have less access to guns in Canada. So when people are melting down, we tend to not have them, do this. But as you can see, 141 of the shootings were at workplaces, 112 were at schools. So schools are in second place. Places of worship are interestingly low compared to, the level of radicalization that often occurs, right? So mass shootings are more likely to occur on weekdays. The timing is normally distributed through the day, reaching peak in late morning. Usually perpetrated with handguns or have at least one, right? They involve a single weapon more often than not, but not always. They're overwhelmingly male. The average age is 34.5 of all mass shootings in the United States. Most mass shooters are racially and ethnically diverse, but the majority are white. Come on, like that's a huge bingo. And I even took some time to read through this article, though I see I'm running pretty long now. I've been talking for a long time. 88% of school shooters had at least one social media account. 76% posted disturbing content of guns and threatening messages. 72% of shooters had at least one reported adverse childhood experience, ACE, and 60% reported being bullied in person or online. It's a study, bullying and social media, school shooters, patterns of adverse childhood experiences. So we're just going to skip right through and go right to the conclusion, because I've been running on for a long time now. Getting to a long episode. Thank you for sticking around. Make sure you hit subscribe, like, share, help me grow this new channel. Trying to get to that magic 1,000 so I can get this channel off the ground. Conclusions. Pediatric nurses, practitioners, and frontline providers use assessments to evaluate students and family safety at home, school, and the community. Recommendations from the study include screening for ACEs, which is the trauma experience we're talking about, experiences of bullying, and incorporated questions about social media use and postings into every client interaction. Professionals who work in primary care, wellness, or school settings can partner with families and community, law enforcement, and other specialties to identify vulnerable, bullied, or at-risk adolescents. Our study findings from a small, violent subset of adolescents do not represent most students in schools. The school shooters in our study were reported to have struggled with personal stressors, including issues at school or home, victimization from bullying, a personal crisis in life. Before the eruption of violence, these adolescent males were in contact with professionals across disciplines and settings. Identifying, protecting, and providing time plus resources to at-risk youth will require support from nurses, practitioners, providers, educators, and caregivers who have ongoing contact with adolescents. We need more mental health workers, structure, system, everything to try to have more of a mass effect across the board in our province and in our country at large. More comprehensive policies and screening is required for troubleshooting among systems. Collaborating with school officials, healthcare providers, parents, and community members is key to ensuring a safe environment. There is a need for all professionals across the disciplines to screen for ACEs and experiences of bullying and incorporate questions about social media use into their assessments of young people and deliver inclusive person-centered care. Okay, there we go, everybody. Thanks very much for coming to the channel. We'll talk to you next time. Be safe out there, everybody. Solidarity, Tumbler Ridge strong, care about you, and let's do what we can, everybody, in our communities to prevent something like this from happening in the future, if at all possible, or at least limit a few, if we can even get to one or two and stop one of these events. And it's possible. You can reach them when they're young. You can maybe get out of this. It's not all just clear mental illness. Sometimes you can actually reach them and bring them back from the brink, okay? Let's hope we can do that next time. Okay, everybody, love you. Take care. Bye now.